Picture this. It's 1280, somewhere along the dusty trade routes between Beijing and Baghdad. The sun's getting low, your camels are tired, and you're carrying enough silk and spices to buy a small kingdom. But here's the thing. There are bandits in those hills, wolves prowling at night, and your water's running dangerously low. Without the right shelter, your fortune becomes someone else's treasure, and you become buzzard food. That's where the Caravanserai comes in. These weren't just medieval motels slapped together with mud bricks and good intentions. They were the backbone of global trade. The reason merchants could haul precious cargo thousands of miles across some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. Tonight, we're spending one complete evening inside a bustling Han on the Silk Road, watching how these fortified inns kept people, animals, money, and information flowing between continents like clockwork. You might think ancient trade was just about loading up some camels and wandering toward the sunset, until you found someone willing to buy your stuff. Wrong. The Silk Road was a precision operation that would make Amazon's logistics team jealous, and caravanserais were the fuel stations that kept the whole machine running. Without them, long-distance trade would have collapsed faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. Let's set the scene. You're approaching the Karnabad Caravanserai just as the afternoon heat starts backing off. This particular Han sits at a crucial crossroads where routes from Samarkand, Kashgar, and Herat converge. Basically the medieval equivalent of a major highway interchange. The walls rise up from the desert like a fortress, which is exactly what they are. 40-foot-high stone barriers topped with battlements, corner towers that could spot trouble miles away, and one heavily fortified gate that's your only way in or out. The numbers tell the story of just how busy these places were. A major caravanserai could handle up to 800 travelers and their animals on any given night. That's more guests than most modern hotels, except these guests came with camels, donkeys, horses, and cargo worth more than some kingdom's annual tax revenue. The logistics alone would give any modern event planner nightmares. As your caravan approaches the massive wooden gates, you notice something that would surprise most people today. There's already a line forming. Other merchants, pilgrims, and travelers are waiting their turn to get inside before sunset. That's because these places operated on strict schedules that weren't suggestions. They were survival rules written in stone and enforced with crossbows. The gatekeeper isn't just some guy with a key. He's a professional whose job requires the organizational skills of a military quartermaster and the people skills of a diplomat. This man can spot trouble from a mile away, assess the value of a caravan with one glance, and remember the faces of every merchant who's passed through in the last 5 years. His ledger book reads like a who's who of Silk Road commerce, complete with notes about which traders pay their bills and which ones tend to attract unwanted attention. Here comes the interesting part about timing. The gates don't just close when someone feels like it. They slam shut at sunset, no exceptions. Miss the deadline, and you're spending the night outside with whatever's prowling the darkness. This wasn't just paranoia, it was practical survival. Night attacks were common enough that every caravanserai operated like a military base once the sun went down. The toll collection process would make modern customs agents look casual. Every person, animal, and piece of cargo gets counted, weighed, and assessed. The standard rate is about 1% of your cargo's estimated value, plus additional fees for special services like secure storage or armed guards. For a typical spice caravan, that could amount to several gold dinars, enough to buy a good horse or feed a family for months. But here's what's really clever about the system. The tolls aren't just random taxes. They're paying for a complete security and logistics package. Your entry fee covers not just a place to sleep, but armed protection, secure storage, animal care, access to craftsmen and repair services, clean water, hot food, and a communication network that spans continents. It's like paying for a medieval version of a full-service business center, except instead of Wi-Fi and coffee, you get crossbow-wielding guards and camel veterinarians. The paperwork involved would surprise anyone who thinks bureaucracy is a modern invention. The scribe recording your information isn't just keeping a guest book. He's creating a legal document that could be used in courts from Constantinople to Canton. Your name, origin city, traveling companions, cargo manifest, destination, and estimated departure time all get recorded in multiple languages. Some caravanserais kept copies of these records for decades, creating archives that modern historians still use to track medieval trade patterns. The security check that follows makes airport security look relaxed. Every weapon gets piece bonded, wrapped with cord and sealed with wax, so it can't be drawn without breaking the seal. This isn't about disarming travelers. It's about preventing the kind of sudden violence that could turn a profitable trade hub into a bloodbath. Smart merchants understood that a few minutes of inconvenience was worth avoiding, the kind of tavern brawls that could leave their entire investment scattered across the courtyard floor. Guard assignments weren't random either. The Han's security chief would size up each new arrival, noting which groups might have conflicts, which merchants carried the most valuable cargo, and which travelers looked like they might cause trouble after a few cups of wine. The night watch schedule got posted like a military duty roster, with specific guards assigned to patrol routes, gate positions, and rooftop lookouts. But the real genius of the Caravanserai system became obvious once you got inside and saw how everything was organized. The central courtyard was like the hub of a giant wheel, with different sections radiating outward for specific purposes. Animal stalls along one side, secure storage rooms along another, sleeping quarters upstairs, and service areas tucked into every available corner. Everything had its place, and everything stayed in its place. Because when you're dealing with valuable cargo and tired, stressed travelers, organization wasn't just convenient, it was the difference between profit and disaster. The evening routine that followed was like watching a medieval version of a Formula One pit stop. Every task had to be completed efficiently and in the right order, because once those gates closed, you were committed to staying until dawn, whether you were ready or not. Leading your animals to their assigned stalls was like checking into a 5-star hotel, if hotels catered to camels. The arcaded stables that lined the courtyard weren't just empty spaces with some hay thrown around. Each stall was designed for specific types of animals, with different ceiling heights for camels versus horses, drainage systems to handle waste, and feeding troughs positioned for maximum efficiency. The watering system alone was an engineering marvel, with channels carved into stone floors that could fill every trough from a central well. The animal care that followed would impress modern veterinarians. Experienced grooms who'd spent their entire lives working with pack animals could spot lameness, detect illness, and treat injuries that could cripple a caravan if left untreated. These weren't just stable hands. They were specialists whose skills were worth their weight in silver to any merchant who wanted his animals to survive thousands of miles of hard travel. The blacksmith's forge that blazed in one corner wasn't just for emergency repairs. It was a full-service maintenance shop where worn horseshoes got replaced, damaged pack saddles got mended, and metal fittings got reinforced before they failed completely. The sound of hammer on anvil was like a medieval version of a NASCAR garage, where speed and precision could mean the difference between making your next destination and being stranded in the desert with broken equipment. This whole animal care operation had to happen fast, because while the grooms were taking care of your transportation, you had your own checklist of tasks that couldn't wait until morning. The most critical was getting your cargo properly weighed, documented, and secured before someone decided your silk bales looked easy to steal. The steelyard scales that dominated one section of the courtyard were precision instruments that would make modern shipping companies jealous. These weren't crude balances that gave rough estimates. They could measure cargo weights to the nearest ounce, which mattered when you were dealing with goods that sold for their weight in silver. The weighing process wasn't just about knowing how much stuff you had. It was about survival in a world where a few ounces could mean the difference between profit and bankruptcy. Every merchant knew that weights and measures varied from city to city, and what counted as a pound in Baghdad might be completely different in Bukhara. The steelyard scales at major caravanserais were standardized against official weights, making them the medieval equivalent of certified scales at a modern shipping depot. Duh. But here's where things get really interesting. The sealing process that followed was like watching medieval quality control in action. Each bale of silk, each sack of spices, each bundle of furs got wrapped with cord and sealed with hot wax, impressed with the Caravanserai's official mark. These weren't just pretty decorations, they were tamper-evident security systems that would make any attempt at theft obvious to everyone. The wax seals served another crucial purpose that most people don't realize. They were like medieval shipping labels that told everyone exactly what was inside without having to unwrap everything. Different colored wax, different seal patterns, and different markings created a coding system that experienced merchants could read like a book. Red wax with a lion seal might mean high-grade Chinese silk, while green wax with a star pattern indicated premium saffron from Kashmir. The storage rooms where all this sealed cargo ended up were marvels of medieval engineering. These weren't just empty spaces with some shelves, they were climate-controlled environments designed to preserve valuable goods during long journeys. Stone walls kept temperatures stable, raised floors prevented moisture damage, and ventilation systems that would impress modern architects maintained air circulation without compromising security. The really valuable stuff went into the special chambers. Cool rooms carved deep into the earth kept temperature-sensitive items, like certain dyes and medicines, from spoiling in desert heat. Some caravanserais even had ice houses where winter ice was stored in sawdust to keep the most delicate goods fresh through the blazing summer months. Imagine explaining to your business partners that your entire investment in rare medicinal herbs turned into expensive compost because you skimped on proper storage. While your cargo was getting the royal treatment, you had other business to handle that was just as critical to your survival on the Silk Road. The money changer's table in the corner wasn't just a convenience, it was the beating heart of international commerce. This guy could convert between more currencies than a modern foreign exchange dealer, and he had to know the current exchange rates for everything from Byzantine gold solidi to Chinese copper cash. The math involved would make your head spin. A typical transaction might involve converting Mamluk dinars into Mongol silver, calculating the exchange rate based on current market conditions, accounting for the purity of the metal, and figuring in the money changer's commission. All of this had to be done quickly and accurately, because mistakes in currency conversion could wipe out months of profit, faster than a sandstorm could bury a caravan. But the money changer was just the beginning of the financial services available at a major caravanserai. Brokers who specialized in arranging onward sales could connect you with buyers in cities you'd never reach yourself. These weren't just middlemen taking a cut. They were information specialists who knew which goods were in demand where, which routes were safest, and which merchants paid their bills on time. The letters of credit system that operated out of these places was more sophisticated than most people realize. A merchant in Venice could deposit gold with a banker who had agreements with caravanserai operators along the Silk Road, then pick up the equivalent value in local currency at stops thousands of miles away. No hauling heavy coins across bandit-infested territory, no worrying about exchange rates changing while you traveled, and no risk of losing everything if your caravan got robbed. The paperwork involved in these financial transactions was incredible. Route notes sealed with official stamps documented safe passages and dangerous areas, updated weekly based on reports from incoming caravans. Price lists showing current market values for different goods in various cities got copied and recopied, creating an information network that kept merchants informed about opportunities and dangers hundreds of miles away. But all this business had to be balanced with basic human needs that couldn't be ignored, no matter how urgent your commercial dealings were. The kitchen that operated out of the caravanserai wasn't serving gourmet meals, but it was providing hot, safe food to people who'd been living on dried meat and stale bread for weeks. The evening stew might be simple: mutton, onions, and whatever vegetables were available locally, but it was cooked fresh and served hot, which was luxury itself after weeks on the trail. The flatbread that came with every meal was more than just filler. It was baked in ovens that could handle dozens of loaves at once, using flour that had been carefully stored to prevent spoilage and contamination. Dates and other dried fruits provided essential nutrients that could prevent the kind of deficiency diseases that killed more travelers than bandits ever did. The hammam that most major caravanserais maintained wasn't just about staying clean, though after weeks of desert travel, that was certainly appreciated. It was a health service that could prevent the spread of diseases that could wipe out entire caravans. The hot water and steam helped travelers recover from the physical stress of long-distance travel, while the social aspect provided a chance to exchange information with other merchants in a relaxed setting. The small masjid tucked into one corner of the courtyard served multiple purposes beyond the obvious religious ones. Prayer times provided a natural rhythm to the day that helped coordinate activities, while the gathering of different merchants for prayers created opportunities for informal business discussions. Some of the most profitable deals in Silk Road history were probably negotiated between prayer sessions in caravanserai courtyards. The lamplit repair sessions that went on into the evening were like medieval versions of roadside assistance. Saddle makers mended torn leather, tailors patched worn clothing, and craftsmen of every description worked by flickering oil lamps to fix the thousand small problems that could turn into major disasters if left unattended. A loose strap that snapped at the wrong moment could scatter your entire load across a mountain pass. So these evening maintenance sessions weren't optional, they were survival insurance. The packing and repacking that went on during these sessions was an art form in itself. Every item had to be balanced, not just for weight, but for access during travel. Things you might need quickly went on top, while heavy items that wouldn't be touched for days got packed deep in the center of loads. Fragile goods got wrapped in layers of protection, while items that could handle rough treatment got used as padding for more delicate cargo. But perhaps the most valuable service the caravanserai provided was something you couldn't weigh on scales or store in locked rooms: information. As the evening wore on and merchants gathered around cooking fires and in common areas, the real business of the Silk Road began: the exchange of intelligence that could mean the difference between successful trade and complete disaster. The news network that operated through these caravanserais would make modern social media look slow. Every arriving merchant brought fresh intelligence about conditions ahead, and every departing caravan carried updated information to the next stop. This wasn't casual gossip, it was life and death intelligence that could save fortunes or prevent massacres. The price reports alone were worth their weight in gold. A merchant who knew that pepper prices had spiked in Damascus could adjust his route to take advantage, while someone who heard that silk was flooding the markets in Tabriz might decide to hold his inventory until demand recovered. These weren't just numbers on a ledger. They were the difference between retiring rich and dying broke in some forgotten desert town. But the really critical information was about dangers on the road ahead. Reports of bandits operating near mountain passes got passed along with the precision of military intelligence: which routes they favoured, how many men they had, what kind of weapons they carried, and most importantly, which alternative paths might avoid them entirely. Smart merchants would adjust their travel plans based on bandit reports that were only days old, sometimes adding weeks to their journey just to avoid losing everything to highway robbers. Border conditions changed faster than desert weather, and staying current could save you from customs disasters that would bankrupt your expedition. A new tax collector who decided to interpret regulations differently, a political dispute that had closed certain crossing points, or a plague outbreak that had quarantined entire regions. All of this intelligence flowed through the Caravanserai network, like water through irrigation channels. The plague reports were particularly crucial because disease could wipe out entire caravans faster than any bandit raid. Merchants who heard about outbreaks in cities ahead could stock up on preventive medicines, adjust their routes to avoid infected areas, or simply wait until the danger passed. One contaminated water source or diseased animal could turn a profitable trading expedition into a funeral procession. Weather information was just as vital as disease reports. Flash flood warnings could prevent caravans from getting caught in wadis that turned into raging torrents overnight. Sandstorm predictions helped merchants time their departures to avoid the worst conditions. Snow reports from mountain passes could determine whether high-altitude routes were passable or deadly traps waiting to bury unwary travelers. The convoy formation discussions that took place during these evening information sessions were like medieval logistics meetings. Multiple merchant groups would negotiate combining their caravans for mutual protection, pooling their guards and resources to create formations large enough to discourage bandit attacks. The math was simple. A lone merchant with a few guards was easy prey, but a combined force of 50 armed men could fight off most threats. But combining caravans wasn't just about security. It was about economics too. Larger groups could negotiate better rates at caravanserais, share the costs of guides and interpreters, and pool resources for emergency supplies. The trade-offs were obvious though. Bigger groups moved slower, required more coordination, and had to accommodate different travel schedules and destinations. The negotiations for these convoy combinations were like diplomatic summits in miniature. Which merchant would serve as the overall leader? How would guard duties be divided? What happened if one group wanted to take a different route than the others? How would they split the costs of shared supplies and services? These weren't casual agreements. They were formal contracts that could be enforced in courts from Crimea to Canton. Some merchants specialized in organizing these combined convoys, taking a percentage of everyone's profits in exchange for handling all the logistics. These convoy masters were worth their weight in silver to smaller merchants who couldn't afford the overhead of organizing their own expeditions. They maintained relationships with guides, translators, and security specialists in dozens of cities, creating a professional network that individual traders could never match. The security assessments that took place during these planning sessions would impress modern risk management experts. Experienced merchants could evaluate threats with the precision of military intelligence officers. Which routes had the best water sources? Where were the most defensible camping spots? Which local rulers were friendly to merchants and which ones were basically legalized bandits charging outrageous tolls? The weapons inventory was part of this security planning too. Each merchant group had to declare their defensive capabilities, not just to the Caravanserai authorities, but to potential convoy partners. How many trained fighters did they have? What kind of weapons and armor? How much experience did their guards have with desert warfare versus mountain fighting? A group with crossbow specialists might team up with another that had cavalry, creating a balanced force that could handle different types of threats. But all this planning and preparation was just the prelude to the most dangerous part of the entire Silk Road experience. Actually getting some sleep while surrounded by strangers carrying enough wealth to buy kingdoms. The evening security procedures that kicked in once the business day ended were more elaborate than most people realize. The gate closing ceremony wasn't just symbolic, it was a military operation. The massive wooden barriers that sealed the entrance weren't just locked. They were barred with iron reinforcements and backed up with stone blocks that would take siege engines to move. The keys didn't just get turned, they got secured in a strongbox that required multiple people to open, ensuring that no single person could compromise the entire Caravanserai security. The rooftop guard rotations that began at sunset were organized like military watches. Different guards took different sections of the walls, with overlapping fields of vision that eliminated blind spots. The signal fire system that connected caravanserais along major routes could relay warnings about approaching threats faster than any messenger could travel. A bandit attack on one hand could be reported to neighboring stations within hours, allowing them to prepare defenses or refuse entry to suspicious groups. The night patrol routes inside the courtyard were planned to cover every corner and corridor where trouble might start. Guards carried oil lamps that provided light, but also served as weapons if necessary. Nothing quite like hot oil to discourage attackers. The patrol timing was irregular enough to prevent anyone from predicting when a guard would pass by, but frequent enough to catch problems before they got out of hand. But the guards weren't the only ones staying alert through the night. Merchants took turns maintaining their own watch over their goods and animals, creating multiple layers of security that would make modern armored car companies jealous. The really valuable cargo got moved to sleeping areas where merchants could keep personal watch over it, while less critical goods stayed in the locked storerooms under official guard. The storytelling sessions that helped pass the evening hours weren't just entertainment. They were information exchanges disguised as social activities. Tales of distant cities included details about market conditions, local customs, and trading opportunities. Stories about dangerous journeys contained practical warnings about specific threats and how to avoid them. Even the most fantastic legends often contained kernels of useful intelligence for anyone who knew how to listen. The dice games and other gambling that went on in quiet corners served a similar function. Merchants who'd been travelling the same routes for years would share information while appearing to just pass time. A casual comment about lucky and unlucky numbers might actually be coded information about which mountain passes were safe and which ones were crawling with bandits. The animal sounds that filled the night weren't just random noise, they were a security system in themselves. Experienced travellers learned to read the moods of their animals like a weather forecast. Camels that suddenly became restless might be sensing approaching predators or strangers. Horses that started whinnying could be detecting sounds human ears couldn't catch. Dogs that began barking in specific patterns might be responding to movement outside the walls. The lamp management throughout the night was a careful balance between security and economy. Too much light would drain oil supplies and create targets for archers outside the walls. Too little light would provide cover for thieves and assassins inside the courtyard. The guards knew exactly which lamps to keep burning and which ones to extinguish, creating pools of light that illuminated critical areas while leaving patrol routes in shadow. But as the night wore on and the stars wheeled overhead, the focus gradually shifted from security to the logistical challenge of getting dozens of merchant groups ready to hit the road at dawn. The pre-departure preparations that began in the darkest hours before sunrise were like watching a medieval version of airport operations, except instead of boarding passes and baggage claims, you had bill settlements and load balancing. The call to prayer that echoed across the courtyard before dawn wasn't just a religious observance. It was the starting gun for the most frantic hour of activity the Caravanserai would see all day. Within minutes of that first call, the entire place transformed from a peaceful sleeping compound into something that looked like controlled chaos, with a very expensive price tag. Account settling came first, and it had to be done fast. The Caravanserai's scribes would fan out across the courtyard with their ledger books, collecting payments for services rendered and settling any disputes that had cropped up during the night. This wasn't just about collecting room and board fees. Merchants had to pay for everything from extra animal feed to blacksmith services to secure message delivery. A typical merchant might face a bill equivalent to several weeks' wages for a common labourer, but considering the alternative was dying alone in the desert, most paid without too much grumbling. The load balancing that followed was like watching medieval Tetris played at triple speed. Every single item had to be repacked and redistributed based on how the animals had fared overnight and what the day's travel would demand. A camel that seemed fine yesterday evening might be showing signs of lameness that required shifting its load to healthier animals. Cargo that had been hastily packed during yesterday's arrival rush got properly reorganized with the kind of precision that would make modern logistics companies jealous. The order of march negotiations were where things got really interesting. Multiple merchant groups that had decided to travel together had to figure out who went first, who brought up the rear, and how they'd handle everything from water stops to security formations. These weren't casual conversations. They were military-style planning sessions that could determine whether everyone made it safely to the next caravanserai or ended up as buzzard food scattered across some forgotten mountain pass. The most experienced caravan leaders knew that the order you travelled in could mean the difference between profit and disaster. The lead group got first crack at water sources and the best camping spots, but they also faced the highest risk from bandits who liked to hit the front of a convoy before the rear guard could respond. The middle positions were safest, but also most likely to get caught in traffic jams when the caravan had to navigate narrow passes or difficult terrain. As the eastern sky started showing the first hints of light, the massive gates that had kept everyone safe through the night began their morning opening ritual. This wasn't just a matter of turning a key, it was a security procedure that involved multiple guards, weapon checks, and a final head count to make sure no one was leaving behind debts or stolen property. The sight of those gates swinging open triggered something almost magical in every merchant who saw it. After a night of relative safety and comfort, the road was calling again with all its dangers and opportunities. Some merchants would pause at the threshold, maybe saying a quick prayer or touching a lucky charm, because everyone knew that stepping through those gates meant placing their lives and fortunes in the hands of fate once again. The dust clouds that rose as dozens of caravans began filing out into the dawnlight were like medieval traffic jams, except instead of honking horns, you had braying camels and shouting merchants trying to coordinate their movements. The sound was incredible. Hundreds of animals, dozens of different languages, and the constant creak and jingle of pack saddles and harness leather. But here's the thing that made the entire Caravanserai system so remarkable. Within an hour of sunrise, the place would be mostly empty again, ready to receive the next wave of travellers who'd arrive before evening. The cycle would repeat itself night after night, year after year, creating a network of safe harbours that made transcontinental trade not just possible, but profitable enough to justify the enormous risks involved. This network of hands stretched from the Mediterranean to the Pacific, creating what was essentially the world's first global economy. A piece of silk that started its journey in a workshop in Hangzhou might pass through dozens of caravanserais before ending up in a market in Venice. Each stop along the way added value through security, logistics, and the kind of information services that kept the whole system functioning smoothly. The numbers tell the real story of how successful this system was. At its peak, the Silk Road moved goods worth millions of gold dinars annually, employed hundreds of thousands of people, and connected civilizations that might otherwise never have interacted. The caravanserais weren't just inns, they were the engine rooms of medieval globalization, the places where East met West, and business got done on a scale that wouldn't be matched again until the age of steam and steel. Without these fortified way stations providing security, credit, logistics, and information, the Silk Road would have been nothing more than a collection of dangerous paths through hostile territory. Instead, the Han system created a commercial highway that knitted together the world's first truly international economy, proving that even in an age of swords and camels, the right infrastructure could make almost anything possible.